Well, hey everybody, I'm John Redland with a real honest rant about tag team wrestling in WWE. Vince hates it. I could just end the video right there, really, if I wanted to, but no, I'm actually going to come up with other points. I'm also going to say tag team wrestling in WWE is pretty much nearly dead. No matter how much talent they have, Vince just seems to fucking hate it, which is really, really odd, and I don't necessarily understand it because you would think that Vince would love tag team wrestling. I mean, Vince Sr. would build his company around, top singles guys, but would also use some really, really good tag teams. And look in the 80s, especially once Vince Jr. took over the company. You had the Killer Bees, the Hart Foundation, the British Bulldogs. You had a ton of other teams. They eventually got the Road Warriors, they got Demolition, they got a ton of other people. They got a bunch of teams that they never seemed to know what to do with. Now, tag teams were always featured well in the 80s. They were never featured necessarily as the main event, except like in very, very select, very, very select big shows. Usually on house shows, I'm sure tag team matches would be featured in the main events. I haven't looked through every single card. Forgive me. I can only remember so much in this damaged brain that I have. Thank you, concussions. But moving back to the tag team topic here, that's hard to say. Just looking at the 80s and looking at the history of it, so many great tag team wrestling matches, so many great tag teams that, existed outside of WWE as well. And that's kind of where a lot of this topic is going to go, where tag team wrestling in WWE is essentially just fluff. Even though great teams like the Revival, you got the New Day, you had the Bar for a while. NXT and NXT UK does have some good tag teams. But even their divisions are a little bit eh. And I know that sounds a bit harsh to say, but then you look at the women's tag team division, which they didn't set up very well. And that was what? 4 teams? Maybe 5 teams? I mean, if you count Vanessa Borne and Aaliyah, which, you should because they're actually featured pretty well as a duo. There's other teams. Rhea Ripley, Reina Gonzalez, I may have mispronounced that. There are some good tag teams and some people that work well together, and just for some reason, Vince just doesn't seem to get it. Now, yes, NXT is totally booked by Triple H and others, and it is featured differently, much more like the older WCW stuff where it's focused on tag team wrestling, treating the wrestling like a sport, and doing some simple angles that will get over and how you get talents over. But just looking at like the 80s, and I just don't understand it with all those great tag teams. They were never featured in main events like they should have been. Now, yes, you had Hogan during that era, and you had Savage, and Warriors started to rise up in 88, 89, that kind of stuff. And you still had the big guys like Andre and a whole bunch of other talents. They too much time to go through all this. The tag team titles were seen as prestigious. There were so many great teams that competed over them. You had for a brief time, Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson, the Brainbusters. Plenty of other teams. The fabulous Rougeau brothers. They're often forgotten about. Jacques and Ramon, forgotten as being a great goddamn team. Both as baby faces, but mainly as heels. The Quebecers, the Head Shrinkers. But taking a look at when he got big teams like the Road Warriors, they were used kind of decently, but not really all that great. And I didn't necessarily understand why Vince couldn't see the marketability of them. He gave him a dummy at one point, and that and other issues, Hawk's issues in particular, caused them to leave the company. And then they came back in 96, was it 96? No, 96 and went to WCW. It was 97. And they were in and out of the company here and there. Well, for a few years, but they were in and out of the company. And even then, they were seen as a team that was really goddamn good, really goddamn powerful in the AWA, Jim Crockett Promotions, other promotions, and were made to be jokes by later by very early in their WWE run. And you had the Natural Disasters, a ton of other teams. The New Foundation, it was, Owen Hart and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. So many good teams. So many good teams. The Orient Express, the Rockers who should have become tag team champions but didn't. And, Mario Janae, Shawn Michaels. Yeah, they eventually ended up splitting up. They did win the tag titles, but it was on a really terrible Saturday night's main event where the rope broke, and instead of stopping tape and fixing the rope because it wasn't live TV, they didn't do that. Yeah, that was a whole botch thing, and Bret Hart's talked about that, and so has Shawn. But looking at all tag team wrestling, looking at even modern stuff, the 90s, the Dudleys, the Hardys, Edge and Christian, from like part 99 into 2000, 2001, yeah, they were featured pretty well, and that's when tag team wrestling had a bit of a renaissance. But even in like, the mid 90s and stuff like that, Head Shrinkers and Quebecers had a pretty good match in 1994, I think in April 94 for the tag titles. But then by, like I think it was like 95, you had Diesel and Shawn win the tag titles. And, Shawn was the Intercontinental Champion and Diesel was the WWE Champion. And then they never defended the belts and just relinquished them. And that didn't help the tag titles at all. The Smoking Guns are an often forgotten about tag team. There are a lot of tag teams that I'm going to forget to mention in all this. The whole point is there are some people that work well as a duo, as a duo and as a duel, not the Steven Spielberg movie. They work well as a unit. I'm not going to laugh at that word, even though I'm laughing at it internally. Vince has just never seen tag team wrestling as, marketable, which is really, really odd. And it's not necessarily something I understand. He loved the Graham brothers from back in the day, especially Dr. Jerry Graham. You would think if he would love somebody that was a traditional, was a tag team wrestler for a time, you would think that he would, gravitate to at least and understand the marketability of tag team wrestling. But he doesn't. He sees it as two guys, and then one of those guys is going to rise up and be a single star. And I'm sure that Vince probably just sees things differently. I know he sees things differently. But let's look at other companies. AWA built themselves around great tag team wrestling as well as singles wrestling. World Class Championship Wrestling had some good tag teams. The Von Erichs and Freebirds were the two top ones, but Gino Hernandez and Chris Adams were a great tag team. You take a look at the Jim Crockett Promotion era. So many great tag teams. You had the Midnight Express, you had the Rock and Roll Express. You had, let's see. You had Dusty teaming up with people like to be the Superpowers. It was like Dusty and I believe Nikita Koloff. But Rock and Roll Express and Midnight Express, fantastics. Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers, they were a great team. A ton of other teams I'm going to forget about there. The Minnesota Wrecking Crew, Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, the Barry Windham and Kendall Windham. They weren't necessarily the greatest team in the world, but Barry could bring Kendall along pretty well because Kendall could not really survive on his own without being a jobber. Doom, the Steiners. Doom's a team that gets forgotten about, but other companies always featured tag team wrestling better. WCW featured it better. You had Terry Gordy and Dr. Death Steve Williams main eventing two straight pay-per-views that WCW did. Two straight pay-per-views. It was Beach Blast 92 and Great American Bash 92. Great American Bash 1992, one of my favorite pay-per-views of all time, was built around tag team wrestling. A tag team tournament. You did also have Vader versus Sting for the world title, but still, then that was a great match. But that was an example, and WCW continued that tradition with great tag team wrestling. Mid-South had great tag team matches as well. For some reason, other companies always saw tag team wrestling as better than what Vince saw it as. And I get it. He did have Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage team up, and it was a tag team main event for SummerSlam, but it was two singles guys put together, and then they faced off against Ted DiBiase and Andre the Giant. Just looking at all this history, it just baffles me that Vince does not get tag team wrestling. And just doesn't understand that you don't have to just take two superstars, put them together, and be, this, and be this, colossal unit. I'm not going to laugh at that. I'm laughing at it. You're laughing at it also. The reason I'm basically doing this, and yeah, you go in the 2000s, that kind of stuff, tag team wrestling really fell off even though there were some good teams. I'm not trying to bury anybody. TNA rose up and, used the NWA TNA tag titles for a while. America's Most Wanted. Daniels and AJ Styles were, a superstar team, but they worked well together. The Naturals, Douglas and Stevens, they're forgotten about as being a really good team. Impact did a lot of good shit. LAX, the Triple X, the New Church, Beer Money, Motor City Machine Guns. I'm naming a whole bunch of other teams right here, and can you name a lot of teams from that era? Like 2004 to 2009. Can you name a lot of teams from WWE that really stuck out, that were given really a push? Yes, the Hardys got a tag title reign at some point, but think about it. You had Cena and Shawn teaming up as tag team champions, or they were tag team champions, but they were facing off against each other while tag team champions in the main event for the WWE title at WrestleMania 23. The reason I'm telling you all this is, you know why it's dead? You know why tag team wrestling is dead? Because Vince McMahon has now officially put a stake in the heart of at least the Raw tag division, and even the SmackDown tag division isn't much better. Because all those superstar teams that I mentioned, and he's had Orton and Cena team up occasionally and that kind of stuff, and Rollins and Reigns team up as tag team champions, even though Rollins and Reigns actually worked pretty well as tag team champions in 2013. I'm talking about when they would just throw the tag titles around like crazy. Now you got Braun Strowman and Seth Rollins as tag team champions. I know it's just to further an angle, but it devalues the tag titles, which already weren't in the best shape as it is. You got Gallows and Anderson. You got other teams on Raw that could mean something and just simply aren't, because, oh no, we need to put the titles on these guys. We need to put the titles on two guys. They're going to be feuding, but we don't care about the tag team division, so we're just going to put this, just put these two guys together, and they're going to win tag titles, and it's going to mean nothing. And then, you had that tag team turmoil match on Raw just this week, which wasn't very good. And you had Rude and Ziggler, who are two very talented wrestlers that do deserve a whole lot better. Rude more so. Ziggler, I think he's pretty much just done with, he's done in just collecting checks at this point, even though he does put in effort. Rude and Ziggler could be a good team. The problem is now you had so many established tag teams there lose. Well, I mean, you had the B team being beaten by the Viking Raiders. And the Viper I wish to wash and wipe your windows. If that scary story appeals to you, congratulations. Because that means that you're cultured as far as enjoying books. But anyway, I digress. The Viking Raiders beat the B team in a little bit. The V team haven't really meant anything. That's okay. Keep saying the V team. Sounds like a female tag team. Moving on. Then Gallows and Anderson come down. Viking Raiders do all this shit and all this bullshit, and they get DQ'd because they're fighting too much in the ring. That's how you write down two teams. Okay, whatever. They weren't going to win. Fine. Whatever. Yeah, they could have done it a whole lot better, but okay. They could have had the Viking Raiders run through one more team, then battle the OC and that kind of stuff, and then you could have had Root and Ziggler come down and not beat 4 established tag teams. Wait. 4 established tag teams. Root and Ziggler, again, who are two very talented wrestlers. They beat the Lucha House Party, Grand Metalik, Lince Dorado, whatever. I mean, the Lucha House Party really hasn't meant anything, even though Dorado and Metalik are very talented, and Kalisto is outside the ring doing good Lucha things. Then they beat what? They beat the Revival. Now, the Revival, by the way, probably haven't signed new deals with WWE, or maybe they have. I don't know. I want them to be happy doing whatever they're doing. If they're not happy in WWE and don't want to sign new deals, that's okay. But the Revival, who have had stop-start booking since they both became healthy, it hasn't meant anything. They haven't meant anything, and I feel bad for saying that because I love Dash and Dawson. They are a tremendous tag team. If I ran a wrestling company, it was $1 billion, if I was a multi-billionaire, if I ran a wrestling company or if I started up a wrestling company, Dash and Dawson would be the first team I'd sign. I'd be like, yeah, come here. I mean, you guys got family? Here, okay. Here's at least $350,000. Guaranteed each a year. But, that's fancy booking and a whole bunch of other bullshit. But the Revival got beat. Okay. You could have the New Day come out and do a distraction thing. They didn't do that. Okay. I covered that in a review with the Derb. But made the Revival look stupid, especially since the Revival are feuding with the New Day. Why don't you just throw another makeshift tag team in there? Because it made the Revival look stupid. Like, okay, if they can't beat a makeshift tag team, how the fuck are they going to beat the New Day? Yeah, they're taking out Xavier, and they've helped take out, Kofi a bit, and then Big E got taken out a bit as well. I get it. I get it. You're trying to establish them as heels, but it's stop-start booking. It's like if they're doing great on one show and not doing great on another show, how are we supposed to take them seriously on the show where they're being booked well? And then they beat Hawkins and Ryder, who have meant nothing. I mean, after the loss, they didn't mean anything even when they won the tag titles. Though it was cool for Hawkins to finally end a streak. They lost, and then Heavy Machinery lost. Heavy Machinery, it's on SmackDown. First appearance for Heavy Machinery on TV in at least a month. Now, I get rotating people out and this kind of stuff, and you don't want tag teams overexposed. Okay, fine. But now Roode and Ziggler have just beaten 4 tag teams that are seen as legit. That just nuked the whole tag division right there. The SmackDown tag division isn't much better. You have the Colognes, or the Colons as I like to call them. One of them's either always injured, or when they're featured, they're jobbed out really, really quickly. The Usos are around. They're on Raw, but, they were going to do that DUI PSA, that drunk driving PSA, but, they got busted going to the studio to film it. I know that's a cheap joke, but hopefully both Usos, especially Jimmy, is getting help, but the joke had to be said. Let me say this, though. New Day, tag team champions. Revival, they're there because wildcard rule, because fuck it. Heavy Machinery, Bryan and Rowan are no longer a tag team. They don't have enough tag teams that they're establishing. I mean, you got the B team on SmackDown, but you have no tag teams that are being well established enough to where you need 2 tag title belts. Now, they're obviously going to keep that because soon SmackDown's going to be on Fox. USA is going to have Raw. But tag team wrestling is dead. It's fucking dead in WWE. Because even NXT, you got the Undisputed Era, you got Street Profits, you got the Forgotten Sons, Lorcan and Birch. Who else do you have? I mean, I'm trying to think of other tag teams that they have there. Because the Street Profits are kind of between NXT and Raw. And I can't wait till the Street Profits are jobbed out. I mean, that sounds needlessly mean and like I'm so negative about WWE. I want tag team wrestling to succeed in WWE, and it just frustrates me that tag team wrestling is not succeeding when it could, because there's so many goddamn talents there. NXT UK has got, more Flash Morgan Webster and Mark Andrews, Gallus, rotating cast of them being a team. You have the grizzled young veterans. You have Amir Jordan and Kenny Williams. I think they're still... I haven't watched NXT UK in a while, so I don't know if they're actually still teaming. But you have some good teams. Mustache Mountain and a bunch of other... You have a bunch of good teams. And even in NXT, there's so many tag title belts. If you have so many championships, if you have multiple championships that mean nothing, then you have no championships. And I thought of doing a rant about championships in WWE, but I already did one of those. And it would just turn into a scathing rant about 24/7 title, which I've ranted about at length. My point about tag team wrestling in WWE is take a look at what AEW is doing. And I'm also going to do another, I'm also going to talk about something here briefly, but AEW's already established great tag teams. Lucha Bros, they've established some other tag teams. Yes, Lucha Bros were established already. Young Bucks, even if I don't necessarily care for them, they're an established tag team. Best Friends, Chuck Taylor and Trent Beretta. You have the Dark Order, which isn't very good. You have Private Party, who is very good. Angelico and Jack Evans. Luchasaurus and Jungle Boy. And some others that I'm sure I'm missing. The whole point of SCU, depending on the rotating cast of them. That right there is more tag teams that I can name than in WWE. Across just one brand. It took me a lot just to think of all the tag teams in WWE right there. And AEW is a smaller company. Yeah, it's run by a billionaire, but it's still run by a company. But it's still a smaller company run by a billionaire. Stumbling over my words here a little bit, mainly because I'm just frustrated watching tag team wrestling die in WWE, and I hate it. And that's not to say the effort isn't there in these tag matches. Vince just doesn't care about it. And then you take a look at New Japan. Now, I'm going to finish up on this. Now, I love New Japan Pro Wrestling. I do. Their tag division isn't any better than WWE's. And that's not for a lack of talent. But think about it. You got the Guerrillas of Destiny, and then you got Evil and Sonata as, the main heavyweight tag teams. And you got others, I'm sure, but it's usually like a thrown together thing. Guerrillas of Destiny are awesome. I got to see Tama Tonga live at 2 Defied Northwest wrestling shows. I wish I'd been able to talk to him and say, just thank you for you and, Tangaloa bringing back, bringing tag team wrestling to the forefront. I would just say, I just wish he had more tag teams to face. Because Evil and Sonata are great, but they're 2 single stars that happen to work well together. And then you got the junior heavyweight tag team division. You got Sho and Yo, Roppongi 3K, ELP, and Taiji Ishimori as the current IWGP junior heavyweight tag team champions. You had like Kanemaru and El Desperado, and El Desperado's unfortunately still injured. And then you had Shingo and Bushi, who were tag team champions for a bit. I get it that not every company can have 8, 10 tag teams in each division, but then why bother having tag titles as prestigious as they are if you're not going to have more tag teams. That's another thing New Japan needs to work on. They need to work on their tag team division, because that's really my only issue there. The never openweight 6-man tag team championships, I guess. I get, somebody told me in the comments that it's because of their partnership with CMLL. But the whole point is, with this video, I love tag team wrestling. I've always loved tag team wrestling. I always will. I just want to see it prosper in multiple companies. That's why I'm excited to see AEW, and why I'm kind of down on some of the stuff in WWE. Because it makes no goddamn sense. There's so many talents that aren't doing anything. Sure, they might be seen as makeshift tag teams at first, but if you can find chemistry with some people, put them together as a tag team. Build your tag team division and stuff like that. And yes, if you want to split them up after 6-8 months, go for it. But if you don't even try, why have a tag title? Why have tag titles on each brand? Especially Raw and SmackDown. It just makes no sense. They really need to work on that stuff, and New Japan needs to work on their tag team division. As talented as the teams are, they need more teams. That's really what WWE needs. WWE needs more teams, but also to establish their teams and not just throw them under the bus for a makeshift tag team who are full of 2 talented wrestlers, but it's really, really a bad goddamn idea. So I hope that this video, maybe inspired you guys to maybe make your own content, and leave in the comments what you think about the state of tag team wrestling in multiple companies. Impact, I really want to mention, by the way, has some good tag teams. They do. Ring of Honor has a couple of good tag teams. There are some other good tag teams I've seen on indie shows. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Strays. The kid, or Icarus in particular, is really, really goddamn good. There's a team, Jaden and Nick Wayne. Jaden, I don't remember his last name. I apologize. But they're a team called Young Muscle. It's Nick Wayne, Buddy Wayne's kid. They, related Buddy Wayne, obviously. They're a really, really good team. I've seen some good tag team matches at indie shows. 4 Minutes of Heat, Rock God Ricky Gibson, Eddie F. and Pearl. They're a really good team. They remind me much of a mix of the Midnight Express and the Rock and Roll Express, and I mean that with the utmost compliment. I don't think either of them are going to be watching this, but should they happen to be watching at this point, honestly, they are a great team, and there are great teams in that I've seen in Defy, War Beast, or Fatu. He works in MLW. War Beast is absolutely great. The American Guns, Ethan HD, and Santiago. There are so many good teams out there, and plenty of others that I'm sure I missed. If any indie people have to be watching this, do not think that I'm forgetting about the teams. I got so much shit going on in my head. But tag team wrestling is out there. It exists. I just wish that WWE would realize this, because NXT takeovers tend to have some really good tag matches, but they don't have a lot of depth either. If Vince realized how marketable tag team wrestling was, he could have a better product. Because I'm not saying singles wrestling can't work, but he could work so much better with tag team wrestling. It can work. It can get the crowd excited. The Usos New Day rivalry, all that, that rivalry was absolutely great. I didn't think it was going to be all that great, but it was. But of course, then you're going to have Braun Strowman and a Kid win the tag titles at WrestleMania 34. And I know the titles were taken away right after that, but it was stupid. It was goddamn stupid. And they were tossed around all like crazy. So the whole point is, I want tag team wrestling in WWE to be better, and in New Japan, because they got talent, but they need depth. But those are my thoughts on tag team wrestling. A bit of a long video, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave your thoughts about tag team wrestling from the history to now, other companies, not just in WWE, but also about WWE. So anyway, like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ritlin. I'll see you soon.